are going to be recording today's session. And so thank you everyone for joining us. The hope is that this recording should go up in the next couple days onto our YouTube channel, and that will be in the email that I send as a follow-up as well with the link to that. So please feel free to share that with anyone who was not able to make it today. So just a couple other things. If you all could go ahead and turn off your video and make sure you're on mute. That way, then as Sandra is sharing her slides, we don't have any bandwidth problems with that. I will be monitoring the chat for questions, and we'll be giving those to Sandra at the end of her presentation. So feel free to go ahead and put any questions you have throughout the meeting in the chat, and I'll be keeping track and voicing those to Sandra at the end. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Dr. Sandra Johnson. And she is a curriculum consultant and works all over the state and does some really great work. And she's going to be talking to us about teachers and students learning outdoors. Thanks, Sandra.
Hi. As you can see, we're going to need a paper and pencil. If you don't have one, I'd appreciate it if you would go get one. We're going to do a couple of activities during the day, and you'll need a paper and pencil for those.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
There's going to be a color run sponsor.
I'm not sure.
Oops. The activities that we're going to be doing today are we're going to be talking about them at least, from the Rangeland curriculum. It was written for Welder Wildlife Foundation down near Corpus Christi. I wrote most of it. Jamie Solis did the beginning of it and did a lot of the background information. She's a wildlife biologist. And the curriculum is provided to teachers and others who attend the Home on the Range workshops. There will be some Home on the Range workshops this year. They'll probably be online, but they're going to be through some of the service centers. Welder Wildlife Foundation's education person is Mandy Krause, and she'll be doing them. She told me she's trying to get Region 1, 5, 14, 18, and 19 for those workshops. And you will get 6 hours of CPE credit. 4 hours will be online and 2 hours will be follow-up. She's got some videos and things for you to see. The Home on the Range workshops are, a lot of the activities you see today will be in those workshops. If you want some activities without going to the workshop, there are 2 activities from the curriculum online for download. One of them is one we'll be talking about today. And all you need to do is go to the website, https://welderwildlife.org, and you go to their education department and look for Home on the Range workshops or Rangelands curriculum. I'm going to turn off my camera if I can find the place to do it, just so that I can talk without worrying about my hands moving around. But my camera has disappeared. Oh, there it is. There. Now, can everybody still see me? I hope.
No.
No. We can't see you, but we can see your slides.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you. Okay. So, students and teachers learning outdoors. Outdoor learning is especially important right now. Students are returning to school, and the safest place is outside, where any virus that might be there is diluted through the outside air. And we also have kids learning online, and they also need to be going outside. So some of these things will be helpful for both teachers in the classroom and online. The most important thing probably about doing activities outside is preparing students. It's important that they have some classroom activities for background knowledge. They tend to not know what to do if they're not familiar with the concepts that you're trying to teach outdoors. And they think of outdoors as being recess and running around and playing tag and things like that. And in order to keep them on task, they need to know what they're looking at. Also, it's really important that when you go outside, students are doing and not just listening. So you can see all of these kids are involved in catching insects. And finally, you should go over the behavioral expectations. Students need to know what you expect of them behavior-wise. First of all, before you go out, you've been studying, say, insects. You want to explain the purpose of your trip outdoors. You want to tell them exactly what kinds of things you expect them to do there. Secondly, you need to explain how to use whatever equipment you're using. In this case, it was butterfly nets. And if you just let the kids have a butterfly net and go outside, they're going to clap it down on the ground on top of something and then not be able to get it out. Or they're going to go flying around, waving it in the air and not really catch anything. So you need to teach them to use it as a sweep net. And once they learn to do that, then they catch lots of different things. And finally, you need to explain the safety considerations. The very first one is that students must listen to instructions. You might want to provide a signal for listening, just as you do indoors, so that they know that you need their attention. Secondly, for younger students, if I'm by myself or with just one parent, I have them all stay in a group so that when we get doing the activities that we're going to do, students will have somebody nearby so that they can have some help if they need it. For older students, they need to at least stay within sight of the teacher or adult. If you have smaller groups, that's great if you have enough people, but there needs to be a parent or other adult with the children in any small groups. And finally, you need students to be aware of where they step or put their hands to avoid things like poison ivy and chiggers and snakes and other kinds of things that bite. I put a couple of pictures of poison ivy on here. I just went to the web and looked it up. And the reason for that is I want you to see what it looks like. And you need to get pictures for your kids so that they can see what it looks like too. Poison ivy is in a lot of places, and they need to be able to identify it. If you'll notice, it's got 3 leaves that attach in one place, and there's a little red dot where they attach. That's the symbol for poison ivy. Also, they need to see what it looks like in the fall. I asked my students to bring leaves from home one time, and one of my students brought these beautiful red leaves that are poison ivy. So we had to get rid of that and all go wash our hands and be careful that we didn't have a problem with it. Some students don't have any trouble with poison ivy, but there are those that have a really severe reaction, and it can last for months. So be aware of that. And the other thing you might want to think about is if they're moving rocks or logs or something, teach them to roll it towards them so that whatever's under there can run out the other direction. You can see these kindergartners, well, this was at Welder, are in an area with the grass mowed. But look what's back here. If they had been walking around back there, there's no telling what they could get in, and certainly chiggers would be part of it. Now, teachers need to have activities to do with their kids. So if you're writing activities for teachers, these are the kinds of things that you need to think about. But also, these are the kinds of things that you need to use when you're working with kids. So first of all, teachers need standard-based and appropriate activities for students' age and grade. And the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills can help you with both the standards and the appropriateness for the student's age. Do be aware there will be new standards coming up in 2021. They don't go into effect till I think 22, 23. I know they're working on them now, but so just be aware of that. These standards that we have now will stay in effect until the others come online. Student-centered activities are really important to maintain student attention. They need to be actively doing and making meaning with hands-on experiential activities using real science skills. And finally, to meet the learning needs of all students, you need to use a variety of hands-on activities. And something that will help you do that is Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences. And we're going to talk about all of these, but if you need a book, there's a book called Frames of Mind, which is about the multiple intelligences. So the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills can help teachers differentiate for various ages, grades, and developments. And in order to show you how to do that, we're going to look at kindergarten and 5th grade and compare the developmental needs of the students at those different grades levels. So for kindergartners, and I've put the concepts in red and the verbs in black. As we go along, you'll see those. And if I had comments, I put those in yellow so it would be easy for you to see. So this is organisms and environments. It's TEKS number 9. And for kindergartners, it says, the student knows that plants and animals have basic needs and depend on the living and non-living things around them for survival. The first student expectation, Neil, did you get me a cough drop? The first student expectation says, differentiate between living and non-living things based upon whether they have basic needs and produce offspring. Now, an example activity of that is animal. I use an animal, a rock, and a plant, hopefully a blooming plant, and I pass that around among the students so they can look at them. And then we talk about what do you think is living? And the children will nearly always notice that animals are living, but they won't always know why. So I ask them to tell me why they think animals are living. Usually they'll say because it's moving, and that's not actually a characteristics of living things. So you need to talk about, okay, is a car living? And they'll go, no. And you say, okay, well, that is still moving, but it's not living. So moving is not a characteristic. What other kinds of things do you know about animals that would tell you they're living? And then they can usually tell me they need water, they need food, they need a place to sleep. And we talk about that. Then we talk about rocks and why they are not living, and plants and why they are living. Some kindergartners have trouble with plants because, again, they are thinking it doesn't move. But you have to go back to them again and say, okay, what is it that plants need? And they can then go from there. It also talks about that they produce offspring. Kindergartners may or may not think of that, but you can add it. A lot depends on if they have seen an animal in your classroom have babies, or, or if their parents garden and they've seen them plant seeds. So you can talk to them about that. The second expectation is examine evidence. Now, that's a big thing. So you have to break that down into what they need to do in order to get to being able to examine evidence. So first they need to observe, describe, compare, synthesize information, and draw conclusions. And so they're examining evidence that living organisms have basic needs such as food, water, and shelter for animals, and air, water, nutrients, sunlight, and space for plants. And you have set the concept to start with that with your earlier activity. And an example that you need to do is observe organisms in outdoor habitats and pets at home and at school, and talk about how do they stay alive, where do pets get what they need to stay alive, where do wild animals get what they need to stay alive, and what do plants need to stay alive, and what if they live in pots, what if they live in the garden, what if they live in the wild. So they can all come to know those ideas. For fifth grade, the concept is much more sophisticated. So it's still organisms and environments, but this time the student knows that there are relationships, systems, and cycles within environments. And the verbs here are pretty straightforward. Observe the way organisms live and survive in their ecosystem by interacting with living and non-living components. So you can talk to the kids about what parts of the environment do the organisms use to meet their needs when you're outside looking at a little habitat. And then describe the flow of energy within a food web, including the roles of the sun, producers, consumers, and decomposers. Presumably, you will talk about each of those separately, but then you can do a game called the food web game. And it's a good experience for teaching these concepts. Each child has a picture of an animal, a plant, a decomposer, and one sun. You make a circle. The sun sits in the middle of the circle. You give them a ball of yarn. They hold on to the end of it and throw it to a plant, which gets their energy from the sun. Then the plant throws it to something that will eat it, say an insect. And the insect throws it to something that will eat it, say a bird. And then you throw it to something that would eat the bird, say a snake. And then you talk about, well, what happens when the snake dies? And they can then understand that other things will eat the dead animal, and those are called decomposers, because when they're finished, the nutrients from that animal or plant will go back into the soil and be used again by plants to take the sun's energy and make their own food. This particular one is predict effects of changes in the ecosystem caused by living organisms, including humans, such as the overpopulation of grazers or the building of highways. In order to predict, they need a base to predict from, something to make their predictions not just wild guesses. So they need to have experience at observing, inferring, synthesizing, and drawing conclusions, and then use that to predict. So some of the things they might look at are, in a drought, what happens to grazers like deer, and they can tell you about that. And then maybe look at what humans do. They build highways, they build homes, and all of that land used to belong in the wild to the creatures that live there. The last one is identify fossils as evidence of past living organisms and the nature of the environment at the time using models. Now, making models requires a lot of skills, observing, synthesizing, and representing information in creative ways. So the first thing they need to do is observe the characteristics and describe what differentiates fossils from other rocks, and then observe what is in the fossil that might indicate the past environment. Then they might make some kind of creative product. It could be a diorama. It could be a puppet show. It could be just a drawing that shows all of those different concepts. Journaling is a really wonderful way to make things developmentally appropriate. First of all, kindergartners and pre-K, because they're not really drawing, not really writing yet, I have them draw something about what they've seen outside. And you can use plain paper, or you can vary it from time to time with different foldables. I've shown you some different folds here, but if you want to learn a lot about foldables, you can contact you can look at Dinah Zeick's book. It's just called Foldables. And she has a number of other books also that deal with foldables, so there's a lot of resources for that. For first and second graders, you can make new journals for each unit and then collect those journals for each student so that you can look back through them and they can look back through them through the year. For older students, you can use a notebook. It can be a spiral, or it can be one of the more inexpensive notebooks. I like the spirals because you can turn them back on themselves and the paper doesn't fly around while you're trying to write outside. But I mentored a teacher who taught 2nd through 6th grade for 4 years, and she had never journaled. So I talked her into starting to journal, and she ended up using the more inexpensive notebooks. And the way she handled the blowing was she put a rubber band over the pages that weren't being used, and that helped the students when they were outside. I like to have students prepare a journal with pre-K and kinder. After they've been outdoors, I ask them to draw a picture for their journals using plain paper or foldables, and I collect those drawings for each child all year in individual folders and use them in student and parent conferences. Older students can use drawings, photos, or magazine pictures for their journal cover. As you can see on this slide, there's a photo there. But you want them to make it their own and give it a personality. In the beginning, when you ask students to go outside and do journaling, you must give them a specific task. If you don't, they'll just go out and not know quite what to do. And I found even adults in workshops must have a specific task or they are lost when they go into journal. So one thing you can do that's really simple but effective is to have students find 3 different kinds of leaves. You can let them pick one leaf, or you can let them pick all 3 and bring them in and make rubbings of the leaves. To make journaling developmentally appropriate, for younger students, have them do their drawing or their other writing or anything after they come in from outside. Older students can journal during the outside activity or when they come inside, but kindergartners have a hard time working with paper and pencil outside. These are 3rd and 4th graders, and they're doing plant journals. Their task was to find grass plants, a flowering plant, and a woody plant, and to draw pictures. As students become more adept at making their observations, you can provide a variety of different tasks and start using journaling inside for labs as well as for outdoor activities. Allow a variety of different ways for students to show information. Sometimes you definitely want to have them make data tables or graphs, or in some way show that they've collected data. But they can also do drawings, poems, observations, reflections, and other means of expression. There are 4 things that you need for standard information in journals every single time: the date, the time, the weather conditions, and the location. With younger kids, you can put that on the board and they can copy it down. And it might even be in pictures. You might draw a picture of the clock with the numbers on it and a cloud or a sun for that kind of thing. But if they're simple words, they can copy them. Older students need to get used to using this data all the time because it makes a big difference later on. If you visit the same site, especially if you're working on your school grounds, you're likely to visit the same site in different seasons and at different times of the day. So you want them to be able to know the differences. So you need to keep that data. This is 5th and 6th graders observing sunrise and journaling. The students that I was working with the teacher in South Texas that I was mentoring, I'm sure they had, but they got to come to Welder twice a year. All the students got to come to Welder twice a year, but the 5th and 6th graders got to spend the night. So the 5th and 6th graders that were there, we'd wake them up early in the morning before the sun came up, take them outside while it was still dark, and have them sit along the road by a big pond that's out there at Welder. And they were to make observations of what it was like while it was dark. What did they hear? What did they smell? What did they see? And then as the sun started coming up, make more observations as new sounds and smells came into being. And they actually, I was afraid they wouldn't like this because they had to get up so early, but they actually told me this was their favorite activity. So now we're going to go outdoors for 5 minutes. They're going to divide you into groups, small groups. Go outside, sit quietly, and observe using your senses. No tasting, and you need to be sure and tell students that so that they don't taste things they're not supposed to. And you can draw a picture or write something about your observations, but the main idea is to observe using your senses. And when you come back in, you'll go into your small group and talk a few minutes about what you've done. I'm going to put a timer on for 5 minutes, so I'll start again in about 5 minutes, or about 7 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead, and if you guys go outside, come back at 2:32, and then I'll put you in your breakout rooms at that point.
Get me a couple more cough drops in case I need them.
Just a reminder, everyone, I put it in the chat, but you'll be outside, and then at 2:33, I'll put everyone into their breakout rooms, and then you'll be in those rooms for 2 to 3 minutes to discuss what you saw while you were outside. You can hop back into the presentation. Sandra, you might be on mute.
Okay, so we started talking about how to make things developmentally appropriate and using the TEKS to do that. Now I'd like to talk about, oh shoot, it went, come on. No, don't do that, there. Okay, so now we're going to look at how to maintain interest with students. So first of all, if you maintain interest, you will not have discipline problems. So be aware that this is a really important step to getting outside and controlling behavior. First of all, the activities should be mentally and physically involving. They can be both indoor and outdoor activities. Provide opportunities to identify with science careers and use skills that scientists would use, and to use a wide variety of teaching materials to meet the learning needs of all students. And this is where Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences comes in. An example of this is 5th and 6th graders collecting aquatic organisms. This was a creek at Welder. It was called Moody Creek because the depth, it rose and fell with the tides. So I would not have the kids get into a creek like that, but I did let them collect from the side of the creek. And this is a task that's grade level appropriate for 5th and 6th graders. I would not do this with kindergartners and younger kids. And the students are mentally and physically involved in an outdoor activity, and they're using skills that a scientist would use. Later, they will continue indoors, classifying and researching organisms and looking at what aquatic biologists do in their careers. If you want to take younger children to a creek, it needs to be a creek that you can see the bottom and is not more than like halfway up to your knee because they're short. Okay, what are Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences and how can they help you meet the needs of all students? First of all, memories are made and associated with experiences. And a lot of these intelligences are different kinds of experiences. So there's bodily kinesthetic intelligence, which is hands-on, active, moving, role-playing. Naturalist intelligence, which is doing things in nature, investigating the environment. Interpersonal intelligence, and this is working with others in groups or pairs. In this activity, they're playing a game that shows students the parts and functions of grass plants. And there's a teacher and students there doing it. Each one of them you'll see has a sign around their neck. That tells them the part of the plant they are and how they move as a part of that plant to show what it does and what sounds you might make to show that, activity that the plant is doing. And students are always surprised by this, to see all the things that are going on in a plant. If you want to make this for younger students, you can just do the simplest plant, draw a big pictures of it and cut the plants parts apart and let the students do it that way. But it uses bodily kinesthetic, verbal, visual, interpersonal, and rhythmic intelligences. Rhythmic because of the movements and the sounds that they're making. Intrapersonal intelligence is working alone or reflecting or thinking. Logical mathematical intelligence is problem solving of all kinds, analyzing data, making tables, graphing. Musical and rhythmic intelligence is singing, writing, songs or raps or poetry, using instruments, dancing, clapping, making rhythmic sounds, and role-playing. There are also other intelligences. Verbal linguistic intelligence is what we usually use in school, which is talking, listening, writing, and using words. Visual spatial intelligence is also what we see a lot of in school, and this is seeing, building, visualizing, manipulating objects in space. And finally, existential intelligence, which is where a lot of your higher order thinking skills come in, asking important questions, experimenting, creative thinking, working with ideas, inventing, introspection, and reflection. So journaling that we've talked about this morning uses a lot of those different intelligences. So it's, I think, important to know that sometimes you will use only interpersonal intelligences, and other times you'll only use intrapersonal intelligences. But they're both important, and often students switch from one to the other. So in journaling, you would have, in this case, the students are talking to each other and to the teacher and looking at things, but they're also thinking about what's going on. So they're using both. These students are observing, describing, and classifying aquatic organisms. And these are things they collected from the creek earlier. They found a variety of pipefish and other kinds of small fish, algae, and all kinds of things like that. Now, basic skills are found in the standards, but not always mentioned specifically. Some, especially of the lower skills, are mentioned specifically, but others higher order thinking skills are not mentioned, but they are expected. So observing, describing, comparing, classifying, and using science tools, collecting and recording and displaying data are a little bit lower skills. And in this particular one, these kindergartners are role-playing predators and prey. They are ocelots, and they're going to walk down a trail and look for bunnies hidden in the grass. This gives them internalizes the feeling of what a predator has to do in order to find prey. So it gives them a good understanding of the predator-prey relationships. In this activity, they've been collecting insects. These are first graders, and they're looking at their insect. And I really was impressed with these two boys because they're sharing so well, and first graders don't always share that well. But this viewer happens to have a place to look from the top, but another place to look from the side, and there are mirrors inside so you can see from either place. And they discovered that and decided to share the tool. Higher order thinking skills are more like generalizing, inferring, drawing conclusions. And it really is important that those conclusions be based on data. And a lot of times students will draw conclusions, but they don't know why they're drawing that conclusion. So we need to focus on being based on data. Investigating, using inquiry, and using models, and representing learning in creative ways. And that might mean writing a rap or drawing a picture or writing a poem. But some men it might be making a graph, but they need to know to have opportunities to do different things. So this is a game, and it's providing opportunities for using a model and learning concepts. This is a game where frogs have adaptations of a tongue that reaches out and grabs insects. So these students are trying it out to see how hard it is for frogs to actually catch any insects. They're not allowed to use their hands, and they pick up their insect with their tongue, take it to a lily pad, take it off and put it in the lily pad, then they can go get more. This is an experiment, and they started inside talking about controlling variables, and all used the same amount of water on their paper towel when they took it outside. And then they had to choose a place to put it and go look at it like every 5 to 10 minutes so they can see when it gets dry. And they have to put them in different places. So some people put them in sun, some in shade, some on trees, some on the grass, some on signs, some in the wind, some not in the wind, so that they can see all the different things that help water evaporate. And then they go back and they do some experiments trying to see what the effects are of each different variable. This one is investigating transpiration, and we did it after doing the evaporation investigation so that kids could see the other parts of the water cycle. And the students, these are fifth graders, I believe, and they had a garden in their school grounds. And so they went out to their garden, and the little girl put her bag on a squash leaf, and the little boy put his on green beans, so that you can see the differences that in the amount of transpiration that comes out of larger leaves and smaller leaves. And then they'll go back in the classroom and make some observations in their journals. This one is just showing you how to put those plastic bags on. I've had teachers have a hard time with this because they wanted to pick the leaves off and then put them in the bag. But no, you leave them on the plant. You put the bag over them, zip it up as much as you can. And if you put a little pebble in the bottom of the bag, the water will run to that corner. This is a third grader. She's using higher order thinking skills. She had been with a group of third graders who were looking at different habitats, and then they were to draw the components of the habitat and some animal that would live in that habitat. And so she made a drawing. This is a real life science investigation and problem solving. These sixth graders were investigating pollution at the creek using inquiry, and they had several different kinds of tools to use. The one they're using here is a checklist that looked at the color of the water, if there was foam in the water, if there were plants or animals in the water. And from that checklist, then there's some things that tells you, okay, if the water's green, are there a lot of plants? Yes, there are a lot of plants. There may be a lot of nitrogen in that pond. And you also observe the area around the pond, and you can see there's places where things have walked down into the pond. And one of the boys said, hey, that's a ranch over there, and all that soil where the cattle are coming down to drink has gone into the pond. And then somebody else said, yeah, and they're probably peeing in the pond. So from that, and from the fact that it was a drought time, they began to formulate some opinions about what was causing the pollution in the creek. And this one, they were using pH paper. They also did oxygen levels and some other things. And then the conclusion they finally came up with was that the creek was low because there hadn't been any rain. Water, and this is down in South Texas, and water came in from the bay into that area, and it was saltier than usual because no rain had come. And when they collected organisms here, they found things like baby drum, no things that you would find in regular creek water like snails or leeches or minnows or tadpoles, just the baby drum. So that led them to say that it's more saline than it was normally. Okay, so we're going to go outside for another 5 minutes. And this time there's two different activities. If you work with younger students, you're going to look for a habitat in your yard, draw a picture of something that lives in this habitat, and tell how it meets its needs to survive. If you teach older students, you're going to go out and look for some changes that have happened in the environment. What do you think caused the changes? And will those changes affect what can live in this environment, and how will that affect them? So 5 minutes outside and 2 or 3 minutes inside.
Sandra, we might need to skip this activity because we only have 8 minutes left.
Oh, no. Oh, well, that might be. That's okay. I only have one more slide. They can do this.
Okay. So go outside, come back at 2:57, and you'll be in your groups, and then you'll come back from your groups at 2:59. Sandra, if it's okay with you, we do have some questions, so we might go a little over 3 o'clock for that question and answer time.
That's okay.
Okay. So go ahead and go ahead and start out in your groups. Or go outside for 5 minutes. So come back at 2:57. It's coming back. Well, you should have everyone in about 20 seconds. Welcome back, everyone. Sandra, if you want to go ahead and put your screen back up. Sandra, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
All right, there I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Starting from the beginning of school, a lot of schools tend to not want to do science or do outdoor activities even really with little kids. And if you start when they're little at the very beginning of elementary school, then they learn in nature and learn to enjoy and understand natural processes and take responsibility for what they do in nature. You don't kill every bug you see kind of thing. They will understand and contribute to the planet as citizens, professionals, and volunteers, and become happier, healthier, and smarter. And I want to give my husband credit. He did all the photographs in this presentation. And here is my contact information if anybody needs to get hold of me.
Sandra, we can't see your screen.
Oh, why not?
Not.
Oh, crap. My little black line won't come up.
So everyone, I'll share Sandra's contact information when I send an email out to everyone. If you've got a little time, Sandra, we do have one question for you.
Sure.
And so the question we got was, how could you do outdoor activities with kids on other subjects, ones that aren't science?
Okay, well, it depends on the age of your kids, but things like I have had kids go out and count the number of trees they can see, and then we investigated what kinds of trees they were, what their leaves look like, and that kind of thing for math. Then language arts, just going outside to read, that you sit under a shady tree and read together is very calming activity, and kids like to do that. So there's a couple of things. With social studies, I think looking at various kinds of careers and visiting, if you can, places around your school, like the library and the fire station, the grocery store, and that kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Wonderful, thank you. If there's any other questions, if you want to go ahead and put them in the chat, I can share that. Here's one: are there ways to modify activities in ways that can be done at home individually rather than as a group? What do you need to think about if that's the case?
I think it doesn't matter whether the kids are alone or in groups, as long as you're guiding them to do the activity. Some of them have to be in groups, like the one with the plant parts, just because the plants have a variety of parts, but others can be just in your backyard or at the park or wherever, and you can do them alone and with the kids.
Well, great. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Sandra. We really appreciated it. Everyone, thank you so much for coming today. Just a couple of announcements. Our next workshop is next month on November 11th. It is a youth-led discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoors. I'll share the link to register for that one if you haven't already in the email.